I would like to share with everyone some work that I've been doing over the past 8 months, and this involves an issue with old floppy disks. So this is one of the floppy disks that I have, and it was written to in an MFS format, which stands for Macintosh File System. And this disk was written to approximately in the late 1980s. The issue that comes up is that when you put this floppy disk into a modern day computer, it's unreadable. And the reason being is that the MFS format is no longer used. So when you put the floppy disk into a computer, the computer doesn't recognize what it's reading, and it asks you if you would like to format the disk. So doing that would erase all of your data, even though it's still on here. So if you have a floppy disk from the 1980s that was written to in an MFS format, especially on an 800K or a 400K Macintosh, then I'm going to walk you through how to go about getting your files back. My first response to this issue was to acquire an external floppy disk drive and plug that into my computer and see if the disk can read it. So let's go ahead and try that, and I'll show you what happens. So plug that in. See here that it appears on the computer. This is running on Windows 7. And let me go ahead and take the floppy disk and insert it. We can hear the drive spin up, and we see that it has power. So on our computer, we go to access the drive, and it says that we need to format the disk. If I go ahead and hit cancel, it says that it's not accessible, disk media is not recognized, may not be formatted. So the computer isn't able to tell what it's reading. So you might be thinking to yourself that you can find some sort of software that will allow your computer to recognize the MFS format. And the short answer to that is no, you're not going to be able to do that. There's a deeper issue than software, and that's the hardware that we're trying to read the floppy disk with. And it's important to know that when Macintosh floppies were written in the 80s, Macintosh was using variable speed to write to their disks. So you might be accustomed to seeing a disk spinning, and it spins at some regular speed all the time, and there's needles that will read data from that disk. Macintosh, for whatever reason, determined that you could store more data on a disk if you wrote in variable speed, because as you get to the outer edges of the disk, I guess slowing down the rate that you read and write allows you to put more stuff there. So even if we had software, we wouldn't be able to read this disk, because any modern day floppy disk drive that you get is going to read at some constant speed. And what it will do is when you put the disk in, it's going to try to check and find some sort of a constant speed that it can read at. It's not going to be able to find one, and then your computer is going to prompt you to format. The answer that I found to this problem is buying something called a Kryoflux. You may or may have not heard of the Kryoflux. If this is something that you've been researching, then maybe you've come across it but aren't really sure what it is, and you might be afraid of spending the money on it because it could be a substantial investment and then you not get what you're after. The Kryoflux is essentially just this little chip, and it acts as a go-between. It communicates with your floppy disk drive and makes the drive read at varying speeds so that you can accurately recover your data. And it's often described as a type of forensic tool, because what it does is it reads the raw ones and zeros off the disk, and then you tell it what it's reading, and then it will create a virtual image of your disk that's on your computer. So what I'm describing might sound a little abstract, but don't worry about that too much, because I'm going to do an entire demo for you so that you can see what I mean by all of this. But essentially, the Kryoflux is set up to work with some of the old school floppy disk drives. So you can't just go out and get that USB dongle and expect it to work. You're going to have to get something like this that I salvaged from an old computer. Now, I do know that this model verifiably works, so it might be worth noting. There's the label, and this is by Alps Electric Company, and I found them on eBay just by looking up that particular serial number. One problem that you're going to encounter when you buy the Kryoflux is because it ships out of Europe, it's going to ship to you with a Euro-style plug-in. If we take a look at the little adapter they send with us, it's just a real basic figure 8 looking type connection. And what I found is actually I took the plug-in off of my PlayStation 2 and used it. But honestly, any type of a figure 8 plug-in that looks like this will work. And it has the US standard on it. So I had to take this one and kind of set it aside and use this other one that I picked up at a flea market or something, or took off of my PlayStation 2. Something else that you should be advised of is that the Kryoflux is a sensitive piece of equipment because it is an exposed board. It is at risk for being fried by electrostatic discharge. So it ships in an ESD safe bag, and some of the things about this aren't particularly straightforward. This plug-in that I mentioned earlier does not plug into the Kryoflux. This plug-in goes into your floppy disk drive. Do not try to use this power supply on your Kryoflux or you will ruin it. Kryoflux itself is powered off of a standard printer cable that you can pick up at your local Walmart or on eBay or wherever. And it plugs into the USB port of your computer, and this is also used to communicate data from the Kryoflux to your computer. One last thing that you should be advised about is how you orient the data cable that goes from the floppy disk drive to the Kryoflux. So when we look at the floppy disk drive, it's not too easy to really mess up the orientation of the cable. We see here on the cable that there's this notch right on top, and we see in our connector that there's going to be a notch there along the top of those pins, right in here. So I'll go ahead and plug that in. It's going to be the same concept for when we plug in the other end of our data cable into the Kryoflux. As before, we can observe that there is it's a little harder to see where it's dark, but there's another notch right in there along the top, and we have another notch in our other end of our data cable. So go ahead and plug that in, like so, and make sure that the connection is firm. If you mess up this cable, you risk frying the board, and then you'll have to buy another one. Our next step is going to be getting the Kryoflux set up to our computer. So we can see here where our printer cable goes in at. And one thing that you must note is do not try to plug the other end of the printer cable into something like a USB dongle or an extension. And so what I mean by this is that the port that the Kryoflux plugs into from the printer cable must be something that is on the motherboard of your computer. It can't go into like an extension or something, or maybe you have a dongle that plugs in that gives you extra USB ports. You cannot plug this printer cable into that because it somehow affects the timing of the Kryoflux. And when we plug in this cable, we can see a red indicator light comes on in our Kryoflux, and this shows that there is power going from the computer to the board and that the communication is occurring. This setup is a little messy, but the last step that we need to do is plug in power from the wall to our floppy disk drive. And the power on our floppy disk drive is a set of 4 pins that's hidden underneath the data cable, just right there. So I have my 4 pins right here. And again, there's notches on the cable itself, and then there's notches on the port that you're plugging into, Just make sure that everything lines up appropriately. So now that that's plugged in, I'll hook in the figure 8. And now that the figure 8 is in, I'll go ahead and plug this into the wall. And at this point we see the green indicators light on our adapter, and the floppy disk drive itself made a little bit of a click. I don't know if the camera will pick that up or not. One last problem that you're likely to encounter with your Kryoflux is that when you plug it into the computer, and as you can see in Device Manager, will oftentimes assign the wrong driver to the device. Now, if you've purchased the Kryoflux and you've looked at their website, they give you some resources on how to download the driver and how to install it. But despite the driver already being installed on your computer, the computer still assigns the wrong one. So to remedy this, I'm going to go ahead and right-click in Device Manager. I'm going to go to Update Driver Software. And I should note, just for your convenience, that it likes to assign Boss of Program port COM8 to the Kryoflux. And this is a common issue that a lot of users experience. But anyway, I'm going to change this over so it says Kryoflux. So I'll go to Update Driver Software. I'm not going to let it search automatically because it's already done that and messed up. So I go to Browse My Computer, and let me pick from a list of devices. And then here it brings up the Kryoflux disk system. Again, that's because I've already installed the driver per the instructions that come with the chip. And then I'll click on Next. And Windows has successfully updated my driver software. And so now if it's changed the location of it from being under ports to USB controllers, which that's technically what this is, and I see Kryoflux disk system. So with all of these things done, we should be ready now to actually use the Kryoflux. The Kryoflux has been designed so that you can execute all the commands you need from the command prompt in Windows. However, if you're not so inclined to do that, or you don't know a lot about computers or any of the syntax, that's fine. They've designed a more user-friendly interface that you can use. So if you go to the files that are on their site and you've downloaded those, we can go to the DTC folder, and then we go down to Kryoflux UI, which stands for User Interface. And when we open this up, you might note that it runs on Java, so put Java on your computer if you don't already have it. And now that we have the user interface, we're almost ready to start running the floppy disk and putting the files onto our computer. It may be the case that when you open this up, it does not already say Apple DOS 400K, 800K sector image. So in that case, you'll need to go to File, Settings, and you can click on whatever it is that you're imaging. I don't know what most of these things are, but we're interested in the 400K, 800K image. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And then one last thing that we have to do is, it's a good time, make sure there's nothing in the floppy disk drive at the moment. As you can see, the light's not on, even though it's got power. And what the Kryoflux has to do is it needs to be able to sync up with the drive. So we're going to go up to Drive, and we're going to go to Calibrate. And we'll start hearing some strange noises as it does its thing. Looking at our user interface, it tells us that the calibration was successful, so we're ready to begin imaging. With the calibration out of the way, we're ready to go ahead and insert the floppy disk into our drive. And this might be worth taking a moment to think about, because we have a MFS Macintosh variable speed floppy disk that's going into a PC single speed drive. And normally this would never be something we would even consider doing. Back in the 80s, Macintosh and PC floppy disks had very little crossover, and if you wanted to take your floppy disk and use it on your PC, you had to reformat it to use it on a PC if it was previously used on a Mac. And so transferring files over was a very difficult process. But anyway, I'll go ahead and put the floppy disk into the drive. And then in our user interface, notice the start button's still grayed out. It's because we need to give it a name. So I'll just call this test 1. And then I'm going to try to get the floppy disk drive in the shot so that you can watch them both happen at the same time without damaging anything. So I'm going to go ahead and I think I might need to specify the output. It's probably going to ask me at the end, where do I want to save this? So I'll go ahead and hit start. We'll notice on the Kryoflux it has this green light indicating that the data is transferring. We can see the varying RPMs that the drive is reading at. Oh, it looks like we had a little bit of an error going on there, but it was able to correct that. And so we just have our indicators, and it's currently going through this floppy disk, and I'm going to skip ahead so that you can see what happens when it's done. And here we are finishing up. And so looks like everything went well. So if we go to, if we can go to File, Settings, Output, we can see that this the image path here tells us what location on the drive that this output to. So it went to, looks like a file on my desktop in the folder Files to Recover. And I think that when you type the path in here, if that path doesn't exist, it will go ahead and create it for you. So let me show you what that looks like here on my desktop. I'll navigate to where that is. Files to Recover. And here we see test 1. And all these are disk images. And so I'll explain what we do with those in a minute. Once we're done imaging our floppy disk, it's safe to just go ahead and eject. And then there's no need for recalibration until we actually unhook everything and shut it off. When the Kryoflux sits idle, these are the types of lights that you can expect to see. The green and yellow just sort of go back and forth, and the red indicates that we have steady power. Now that we've completed the imaging, we can go ahead and put away the floppy disk drive and the Kryoflux and any other cables, and I'll go ahead and show you what needs to be done on the computer from here. As far as software goes, there are going to be a few different programs that you need in order to make this work. The first one is Mini VMac, and what this is it's an emulator that allows you to run a Macintosh, an old Macintosh computer on a modern day computer. And you can look up Mini VMac online. There are plenty of resources for how to get started, but I'll just show you my setup. So I have the application installed here. You hear it beep just like an authentic Macintosh would. And this Utilities 1 image, it's an image file, as you can see under the type here. What this is this is the equivalent of a floppy disk. And back in the day, you would take your floppy disk, you would insert it into your machine, and then that's how you would boot up. You have to insert the operating system, which was on a floppy disk, into your machine. So we're going to, instead of inserting, since this is a digital computer, is we're just going to click and drag this file over to here. And that's how we're going to boot it up. My window disappeared. Let me do this. So I'm going to take the Utilities floppy disk and drag that over here and drop that in, and now I'm inside the virtual Mac. And I can go to, just to show you about the Finder, you can see that I'm running system 6.0.8. I'm sharing this with you in hopes that it might save you some time when you come to the point where you need to start choosing what OS you want to boot on and that sort of thing. You can see what I'm already using. So And enough of that, I'm actually going to shut this down because this isn't what I want to boot from. I don't want to boot from the utilities disk. So, restart. For some other resources that you will need, you'll need to go to macintoshrrepository.org. And they contain all sorts of software that you can click and drag into your virtual Mac and run applications. One of the most important ones you're going to need, at least that I used for this project, was Microsoft Word 1.05. I was actually searching for Word 1.0, but I could only find it in German, so this is the closest version that I could find that was in English, and it'll do just fine. So you can go ahead and download that. They usually have, like, here it is in a zip file and that sort of thing. And so what you can do with this is you can actually boot from Word. So I still have my virtual Mac open here, and here you'll see the this is my floppy disk. And so I'll go ahead and pull that over to my mini VMac. And it's booted up, and we have the Word Master icon. If you'd like, you can use the Control F function, and it will actually full screen this for you. And this is basically Word 1.0. We have several different applications going on here. We can open up a blank Word document and type and all that normal stuff that you would expect. Save changes? No. Have to quit the app. Another resource that you'll want to consult with is something, a group called the Gifreel Project. And what they have is a website called gifreel.com. Hoping that I'm pronouncing that right. I could be totally butchering it. But they have a download on here called Export FL. And what this will allow you to do is to export files from the mini VMac. And then they have other things for copying the clipboard from the virtual Mac to your normal computer, and to import files into the virtual Mac. But without further ado, let me go ahead and show you what needs to be done to open up your files. Once we've booted the virtual Mac from the Microsoft Word, what we're ready to do is take our file that we imaged, in this case it's test1, and I'll click and drag that into the virtual Mac. You'll see that what you named it as far as how you named it in the Kryoflux, that's its name now. And we can go ahead and open this up, and I'll just select one of these files. Hope everyone likes Isaiah. And it automatically opens up in Word 1.05. And so if I close that file out, I'm still in the application, so I have to close that. But see, you can see the little Word icons. It's just the Macintosh is able to tell that it's dealing with Word files. So now that we have our file, and we can read it and everything, I can scroll through it and come down here to the bottom, and pretty much everything we want from a file. What we need to be able to do is get that off of the virtual Mac and onto our computer. And that's where we turn to the export program that we downloaded from the Gifreel project. So we'll take this floppy disk and drag it into here. And let me go ahead and close out some of these files. This was Isaiah 1 through 9. So I'm going to go to export, and it says it's ready to export a file. So I'll go to File, Open, and I'll navigate to the drive. In this case, it's drive labeled Test1, and I'll find that the name of that file, Isaiah 1 through 9, and then we go to Open. Well, now we have the Windows Explorer file chooser open, and so I'll just throw this on the desktop as it's named it Isaiah 1. So I'll hit Save. And if we look on my desktop, here it is down here. Because I've done some work with this previously, the computer kind of already knows to label this and think of this as a Word file. However, yours might not. And so if that's the case, you just need to right click on it and go up here to Open With, and just tell it that this is a Word file. So we'll click on that. The rest of this should be the same for you. So then Word goes to try to open this up, and it doesn't recognize how the file's encoded because of how old it is. Everything looks normal here, but you have all these different options to choose from. If I click on other encodings, I can scroll through and choose any one of these options. Don't worry about that. Just click on Windows Default and just let it open under the default setting. And what we'll notice is that the format is all messed up, and it doesn't look anything like what it did in our original file on the Macintosh. See, here it's all nice, and you have some indentation going on, and like we have a table right here. But if we come over to our current Word document, it's all just one giant mess. So to fix that, we have these odd symbols here, and what that is that's leftover code from the Word file in the Macintosh, and we'll just go ahead and delete that. I don't know if code is the right word, so don't hate me if that's not technically correct. And then I'll come down here to the bottom, and the problem we have is it'll take, when the file is done, it'll actually grab text from somewhere else and put it at the end of the file. So we don't know where the original file ended. So we have to look on the Virtual Mac. So we come over to the Virtual Mac and we scroll down to the end, and we see that a husband and his wife, verse 21, that's where the file ends. So in the on the newer copy we have open, I see a husband and his wife, verse 21, and this period is supposed to be there because I see over here that there was a period at the end. So I'll go ahead and select all this stuff, and then we get a couple other blank pages as we scroll down of just random text as well that doesn't really make any sense. So I'll let this scroll down to the bottom. I'm clicking and dragging essentially so that I can highlight all this stuff, and then I'll just hit delete. And when I delete all that, it realizes, I don't know what it realizes, but it goes back and corrects the formatting, and now we have a file that resembles what we originally had here in the Virtual Mac. So and then we have one Word document that we've taken from the Virtual Mac from a 88 or something like that Word document in Word 1.0, and we've managed to get that onto Word 2016. So the last step is to just go ahead and save this. I always hit save, and then it says, do I want to preserve formatting? Click no, so that this will save as a Word 2016 document, and then I'll just be sure the name of this file matches up with the original. So this is Isaiah 1 through 9, so that's what I'll name this. Save that on the desktop, and now on my desktop, well, I didn't, yeah, there it is. Here it is. So this is the end of the process. What we essentially did is we took an old floppy disk from the late 80s that was written in MFS format. We managed to image that using the Kryoflux. We loaded that image into the Virtual Mac, and then exported that using some software from the GIFREL project, and managed to get it to open and be recognized in Word 2016. There are probably other ways that you can go about doing this, and I would actively encourage anyone that has those methods to please publish those out there. There are also other types of files that need to be recovered that are maybe image files or charts or something like that. I'm not entirely for sure, but this is just how you can get Word documents off of really old MFS floppy disk drives. So I hope this video could be of help to someone. Feel free to reach out to me with any questions. I'm not sure where this video is going to end up, so maybe if it's on my YouTube channel, you can leave a comment, and I'll get back to you that way, or you can just find me in person or whatever. But again, I hope this helps you in whatever problems you might be facing with your old floppy disk drives.